Welcome to this Hidden Front History deep dive. We're here to get into the stories that happen, in the margins of the history
The ones
books.
that really dig into the moral contradiction.
Exactly. The
Yep.
choices that people make when they're caught between military protocol and just their own conscience.
And today, we are really opening up a set of sources that detail a footnote of World War II so full of paradox, it just turns the whole idea of enemy and ally completely on its head.
It really does. This isn't a story about a big battle.
That.
It's a quiet, intensely personal conflict that was fought right here in America.
In Wisconsin, of all places.
Right. So our mission today is to take you deep into the story of 47 Japanese women. They were prisoners of war at a place called Camp McCoy back in 1945.
And what makes this story so essential to understand is that these women who were conditioned to expect the absolute worst from their American captors.
End up being actively protected by those same American guards.
Yes. Warned, shielded, the whole thing. And not from some external threat.
No, and this is the core of it. They were being protected from a threat that came from inside their own military structure.
Their own repatriated Japanese officers.
It's the ultimate reversal, isn't it?
Completely. The American devils, which is literally what they were taught to call them, they suddenly become the protectors, the human shield.
And on the flip side, their own countrymen, the officers who preached honor and loyalty.
They become the source of fear, of this corrosive shame, and just active psychological harassment.
So that's the paradox we're going to unpack. How does survival become a betrayal? And how does the enemy become your only sanctuary?
It's a heavy one.
Okay, let's get into it. We should start with who these women were and the immense psychological burden they were carrying when they first arrived.
We have to. The context is everything. So we're talking about 47 Japanese women, and they're mostly very young.
Like teenagers, some of them.
Some, yeah. The range is primarily 18 to 25. They'd served on Saipan as nurses, clerks, radio operators. Yeah. Our sources give us a real focus on one woman in particular, Keiko Tanaka. She was a 22-year-old radio operator.
And what was their physical and mental state?
Physically, they were frail. Months of near starvation. But mentally, their minds were just completely saturated with decades of this extreme, dehumanizing Japanese propaganda about Americans.
So they weren't just expecting to be captured. They were expecting horror.
Absolute horror, yes. We have these Red Cross interview notes, and they detail the mindset on that long journey across the Pacific. They were terrified.
What were they saying to each other?
The whispers on the ship, they tell you everything. One woman was convinced they'd be separated and just worked until they died. Another claimed she'd heard they feed prisoners to dogs.
Wow.
A really specific one. That American soldiers carried razor wire in their pockets just for casual torture. They genuinely believed they were sailing to meet actual monsters.
And that fear, it's not just based on propaganda, is it? It's compounded by their own personal trauma from Saipan.
Yes. That's the stone, as one of them called it. The stone they carried in their hearts. They had all been there for those final brutal days of the invasion.
When the Japanese command knew it was over,
It was irreversible. They'd listened to the speeches about national honor, the shame of surrender, and they received explicit orders.
the order to commit suicide.
Choose death. Jump from the cliffs rather than suffer the dishonor of falling into enemy hands.
So these women, they are the ones who didn't jump.
They didn't. Whether by active choice or just circumstance, they survived. And that simple choice to live already made them moral failures in the eyes of their commanders. Traitors to the Code of Bushido before they ever even saw an American guard.
They were traitors just for breathing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But, and this is crucial, amidst all that fear and self-condemnation, there was one voice of, sort of, rationality. Sachiko, the head nurse. As they were being processed, she brought this tiny glimmer of legalism into the despair. She kept insisting, they will follow the Geneva Convention. I read about it.
A desperate hope.
Desperate is the word. The others just scoffed at her. They said, what rules did our own army follow when they ordered civilians to jump?
The irony is just thick. They're hoping the enemy will follow rules their own side had just brutally thrown away.
It's a perfect setup for the shock that's coming. Because they spend 16 days on that ship mentally preparing for a hellscape.
And then they dock in San Francisco.
And see something that it completely defies all that preparation.
What did Keiko Tanaka say?
Her direct quote is, "It looked like something from a movie."
I can't even imagine that shock.
It was immense. The world they saw from the portholes was pristine, untouched by war. Skyscrapers soaring into the sky, cars moving in these orderly lines, people on the sidewalks just laughing,
Well,
carrying packages.
and you have to remember, this is a nation that's been at war for 4 years.
But its heartland was whole. It was wealthy. It was thriving. And she had personally seen Tokyo. She'd seen it reduced to smoldering ruins and ash. Her own family home was just burnt timber.
That dissonance must have felt like vertigo.
It did. And her reaction, as she recounted it, was this really complex mix. First, just pure, blinding anger at the unfairness of it all, grief for her country. But then, deep down, underneath all that,
A spark of relief.
a small, treacherous spark of relief, as she
Yeah.
put it. Relief that she was alive, that she was away from the bombs and the terror.
And that treacherous spark is so important. It's the first crack in that wall of propaganda.
It is. And the wall really starts to crumble on the train ride inland to Wisconsin.
The train itself was a shock, wasn't it?
A luxury. Clean cushioned seats, windows, heat. But the moment that truly shattered their reality was the food.
A sandwich.
A simple, unbelievable reality of a sandwich.
We have to unpack what this meant. This isn't just food.
No, it's a symbol of this incredible, easy abundance. They were handed thick slices of soft, fresh white bread.
Things we take for granted.
Completely. And it was layered with sliced meat, cheese, fresh lettuce. This was food they had not seen in 2 years. They'd been surviving on meager rice, boiled grasses, whatever they could scavenge on Saipan.
So what was the reaction?
The documentation is just astounding. First, stunned disbelief. They're holding them, checking the corners, whispering, "Is it poisoned?" They expected a trick.
And then Ko takes a bite.
She takes a bite, and the taste, the texture of soft bread, the salt from the meat, it's so overwhelming that she just starts to cry.
Oh, wow.
Uncontrollably. She turns her face to the window because she's so profoundly ashamed that she's weeping over a sandwich provided by the enemy.
That contrast between the starvation they'd endured and this simple act of decency.
It was, as the source notes,
Yeah.
almost too much to bear.
So from that emotional high point, they arrive at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. And it looks like a prison camp.
It does. Barbed wire, guard towers, the whole thing, but the atmosphere. It's immediately wrong.
How so?
There's no smell of death or desperation. The guards are casual. They're efficient, but not hostile, not brutally urgent like they'd been conditioned to expect.
And then comes the part they were all dreading.
The dousing station.
This was supposed to be the moment of ritual humiliation.
Exactly. The torture, the degradation, they were braced for it. But instead of rough handling and ice-cold water, they walk into a room with clean tile walls. It's warm, there's steam.
And they were given soap.
Real soap.
Yeah.
White bars that smelled faintly of flowers. And soft, thick towels.
The luxury of hot water.
That simple, profound luxury of hot flowing water and a soft towel. It caused some of the women to just weep openly.
It was the complete subversion of everything they'd been taught.
Total. They had prepared their minds and bodies for cruelty, and they were met with something that looked, for all the world, like basic human decency. Care.
It's more than just a bath. It's physical proof that the enemy is not the monster they were told he was.
And the routine that follows just solidifies that dissonance. Life becomes clean, safe, and benign, surprisingly monotonous.
They were given work.
Light, organized work, laundry, cleaning their barracks. They even received small amounts of camp script to use at a canteen.
They were living better as prisoners than they had as soldiers.
In a way, yes.
Mhm.
Better than they had in 2 years of active service. But that very comfort, that safety, it fueled this intense anxiety, this gnawing question.
This is the pivot, isn't it? The psychological turn.
Absolutely. Their whole lives, they'd been taught that Americans were devils and surrender was the worst possible fate. But if these Americans aren't monsters,
Then what does that make the Japanese officers who ordered their own people to commit suicide? If the enemy is humane, then your own side is what?
precisely, the consensus that started to form among the prisoners, it speaks volumes. One source quotes their feeling as, "Not pain, but confusion. Not cruelty, but kindness we do not deserve."
They're struggling with the idea that survival might not be a betrayal.
Exactly. And the resilient Sachiko is there, suggesting that maybe survival is its own kind of quiet courage. They were being forced, day by day, to completely redefine their moral universe based on the actions of their supposed enemies.
And that psychological groundwork is so essential for what comes next, because they've found physical safety, but their greatest danger hasn't even arrived yet.
That's right. The danger was coming from their own side.
So before we get to that threat, let's talk about the guards themselves, the ones who became the protectors.
Yes, most of the guards were, detached,
Mhm.
professional. But 3 in particular were different. They're the ones who formed the core of this protection system.
What made them different? Was it just personal empathy?
It seems to be a combination of that and their backgrounds. You have Corporal James Mitchell, an Iowa farm boy. Red hair, freckles, not a hardened career soldier at all.
Just a regular guy.
A regular guy who was an observer. He was known for making these simple gestures, like drawing pictures to communicate, just showing a willingness to connect beyond the uniform.
Okay, who else?
Then there was Sergeant Mary O'Brien, a former nurse. Her fiancé had actually been killed at Normandy, so she carried this deep personal grief.
But she didn't let that turn into bitterness.
No, she maintained what the sources call a firm kindness. She understood suffering intimately, but she refused to inflict it on others.
And the third one was the translator.
Private First Class Robert Chen, a Chinese-American from San Francisco. His background, navigating that kind of cultural complexity, it made him absolutely invaluable.
He spoke some Japanese.
He did, and he became the essential bridge between these two completely different worlds, these two ethical systems.
And Chen is the one who sounds the first alarm.
He is. Just 3 weeks after the women have settled into their routine, he delivers the first terrifying warning.
What was it?
He tells them that repatriated Japanese officers are coming. These are POWs themselves, but they're now collaborating with the Americans, doing intelligence and translation work.
And they were coming to inspect the women.
Yes. And Chen's instruction was so specific, so urgent, and so telling. He said they must hide any sign of comfort, hide any sign of improved health.
So, don't look healthy.
Do not let these officers see that you have gained weight or that you look healthy.
Now let's say the danger wasn't physical, it was shame.
It was cultural judgment, enforced by their own hierarchy. The war for physical survival was over. But the war for honor, as defined by this archaic, unforgiving military code, was just beginning again.
And it was being delivered by their own countrymen.
Ko said her stomach just dropped. She realized the new threat wasn't from the men holding the keys, but from the men who used to sign her paychecks.
So the peace they'd found was now being framed as a betrayal.
Immediately. The next morning, Colonel Watanabe arrives with 2 aides. The sources describe him very clearly. A thin man in his 50s with hard eyes and a rigid posture. He didn't just represent the military. He was the living embodiment of that fatalistic hierarchy they had fled.
And he doesn't waste any time.
Not at all. He walks slowly down the line of women who are standing silently, respectfully, and he just examines them with this air of profound, cold disgust.
He launches into a verbal assault.
Right there in the yard. His voice, translated by Chen, was harsh and cutting. And he accused them directly, using the worst possible language in their culture.
What did he say?
You chose survival over honor, over the emperor, and over your comrades who chose the proper path of death. You have brought shame to your families. Look at you. You have even grown fat on American food.
The emphasis on their health, on being fat, was the proof of their betrayal.
It was the ultimate insult. It confirmed, in his eyes, that they had luxuriated in their captivity.
And the women, when he questioned them, they had to walk this impossible line.
A razor's edge. They had to whisper their answers, and they could only say that they were being treated according to the Geneva Convention.
Why was that so specific?
Because they couldn't complain. That would imply they cared too much about comfort, which betrayed the stoicism expected of them. But they couldn't praise the Americans either, because that would imply they accepted the enemy's kindness, which was a moral betrayal.
They were completely trapped.
Every word from Watanabe was a precision weapon, designed to inflict maximum psychological trauma. And all of this is happening right under the noses of the American guards.
Who were just watching.
Standing silently, as protocol probably required.
Yeah.
But their faces told the real story. Corporal Mitchell's face was red with mounting anger. Private Chen's jaw was clenched.
They were witnessing a kind of cruelty they themselves would never use.
Calculated cruelty. And it was being inflicted by supposed allies on these women under their protection.
And the impact on the women was immediate.
Devastating. Their morale just plummeted. Keiko Tanaka later said that in that moment she thought, he is right. We are traitors. The old propaganda, which had been defeated by a sandwich and hot water, it all came rushing back.
Matsuchiko steps in again.
She does. She pulls them together and insists, do not let him poison your mind. He represents death. We represent life. We are survivors.
That distinction is everything. Traitor versus survivor.
It was the psychological defense they needed to cope with that trauma. And for the American guards, that inspection changed everything.
It crystallized their duty.
It did. They had now witnessed firsthand the very real, very painful threat these women faced. And they realized their job wasn't just to keep the women in, but to keep the judgment out.
Which leads us directly into the next phase, where the guards start taking active, almost bizarre steps to protect them.
Yes. This is where the secret warning system gets formalized.
How did that come about?
It was Chen. He could monitor communications and he understood the movements of the Japanese officers. When another round of them were scheduled to arrive for so-called private interviews, he knew what was coming.
These weren't for intelligence gathering.
No, not really. They were for shaming the women one-on-one in a private setting. So Chen established the code.
And the code itself is it's stunning when you think about the context.
It is. The code was, run. Your commanders are coming.
Think about that. Just the absolute inversion of reality needed for that phrase to mean run to safety.
When they heard that shout, and it was often Corporal Mitchell's voice, loud and urgent, it was the signal to drop everything. Laundry baskets, cleaning tools, notebooks.
Yeah.
Everything.
And scatter where?
Towards the American barracks or other designated safe zones. They were literally running from their own military command and toward the protection of the enemy's jurisdiction.
The scene must have been absurd.
Almost darkly comedic. The sources described the clattering of their wooden sandals on the concrete as they fled. The Japanese officers would arrive to find empty yards, scattered laundry, and no prisoners.
And their reaction?
Sometimes they'd laugh in frustration, sometimes they'd just leave completely puzzled. But Chen was right to be so vigilant.
They started trying to catch them off guard.
Deliberately. They wanted to catch them in a moment of comfort or doing a task they thought was too subservient. And that led to the physical climax of this whole story.
The mess hall.
The confrontation in the mess hall.
There was no warning this time.
None. Colonel Watanabe and two other officers walk in completely unexpectedly during breakfast, and Keiko Tanaka is caught right in the middle of her meal.
What was she eating?
Oatmeal, fruit, and toast. A simple, peaceful moment just shattered by his sudden appearance.
And he confronts her directly.
He stares down at her tray, and the contempt in his voice is just dripping. He says, "You eat well while your countrymen starve in the ruins of Tokyo. Does this food, provided by the barbaric enemy, taste like victory, traitor?"
He's not just insulting her. He's challenging her very right to exist.
He is. And then he crosses the line from verbal to physical. He raises his arm and just sweeps her entire tray, oatmeal, cup, everything onto the floor with a loud crash.
You do not deserve such plenty.
That's what he sneered. And that physical act of cruelty, that is the moment Corporal Mitchell intervenes.
Instantly.
Instantly. No hesitation. He steps forward and physically places his body, the human shield, between the colonel and the terrified Co.
And O'Brien and Chen back him up.
Immediately. They form this loose but very clear line of defense. They put their careers, and maybe even their physical safety, right on the line in that moment.
And Mitchell, he cites the Geneva Convention.
He does. He asserts American authority and demands that Watanabe take any concerns to the commanding officer, Captain Thompson, and not harass the prisoners directly.
How does Watanabe react to being confronted by a corporal?
The sources say he realized he had miscalculated. He saw the pure, palpable anger on the American faces. He realized, with what must have been astonishment, that these Americans actually cared about their prisoners.
So he backs down.
He retreats with this stiff, unpleasant smile and some grudging apology about a misunderstanding of jurisdiction.
I can only imagine what was going through Ko's mind.
She later said she cried, not because of the tray, but because for the first time in her life, someone had physically protected her from shame. And that protector was wearing the enemy's uniform.
So the moral choice was made, but then comes the political cost.
Inevitably, Mitchell is called before his commanding officer, Captain Thompson, almost immediately.
And Thompson is in a tough spot.
A very tough spot. He has to maintain smooth relations with these collaborating allied officers for intelligence purposes. Mitchell has just potentially caused an international incident over a bowl of oatmeal.
So what was Mitchell's actual defense? Did he have legal footing?
He did. He relied on the Geneva Convention, specifically Article 13, which states that prisoners of war must at all times be protected, particularly against acts of violence, intimidation, insults, and public curiosity.
And Watanabe's actions were a clear violation of that.
Textbook violation. Sweeping the tray was intimidation. Calling her a traitor was an insult. So Mitchell's defense was just brilliant in its simplicity.
He argues it was his duty.
More than a choice, it was his duty under the internationally agreed-upon rules of engagement. He put it right back on Captain Thompson. He said, "If we do not protect them, who will? And what does it say about us, about American honor, if we let this happen?
He really framed it as a question of their own honor.
He did, and Thompson was trapped. He couldn't punish Mitchell, because Mitchell was right. He eventually affirms him, says you did the right thing, but he also cautions him severely about the complexities of wartime politics.
But the message was sent.
The message was sent. The guards had accepted the political risk to protect the dignity of these women, and they had to expand that protection even further.
As the Wisconsin winter set in.
Yes, the Japanese officers returned, and their agenda was now even more insidious. It was sustained psychological abuse, but disguised as required intelligence documentation.
These were the private interviews.
Yes, this was psychological warfare conducted in a quiet office. They were trying to document shame, to force the women to admit their dishonor. And the case of Hana, a 19-year-old, proved their intent.
What happened to her?
She came out of her private interview, swollen from crying, and just collapsed back in the barracks.
What did they do to her in there?
They didn't ask about troop movements. They pressed her for hours about her morality, called her a traitor, talked about her parents' shame, told her she should have chosen death. It was designed to break their will.
And Ko saw this.
Ko saw Hana's collapse, and fueled by this fresh rage, she went right to Private Chen. The American guards took it straight to Captain Thompson.
And Thompson, despite the delicate diplomatic situation, he acts.
He does. He realizes this is ongoing psychological damage, so he makes another decisive ruling.
An American officer has to be present.
At every single remaining interview, Corporal Mitchell, Sergeant O'Brien, someone trusted, would now accompany the women into that room.
And what was the effect of that?
It was immediate. Mitchell accompanied the next woman. He just sat there quietly, watching, taking notes. He told the Japanese officer, keep it professional. But his simple presence was enough.
It stopped the personal attacks.
Instantly. The Japanese officers knew they could no longer inflict that deep psychological harm in front of an observer who was legally bound by the definition of humane treatment. The guards were now protecting them from private, insidious abuse.
And that sustained commitment through that brutal winter must have transformed everything for the women.
It did. It utterly transformed their environment and their understanding of the world. It was proof.
Yeah.
Demonstrable, consistent proof of their new reality.
Which brings us to the final part of this story, the transformation, the healing, and the departure.
Yeah. The sources just show a world completely turned on its head. The small kindnesses that had started it all, they just multiplied.
Like what?
Extra blankets during the deep cold of the Wisconsin winter. Work details being shortened during dangerous wind chill, and medical care that was completely comparable to what their own American soldiers were getting.
It was the consistency of it.
The consistency of decency. And the result was this profound internal shift. They started to feel safer in captivity under the enemy than they had ever felt under the command of their own army.
They realized compassion didn't have a nationality.
Exactly. They saw good Americans and cruel Japanese in this stark, undeniable relief. Ko started writing in the small notebook Chen gave her, trying to make sense of it all.
What did she write?
She wrote, I was taught that Americans were devils, but here I am warm and fed, protected by those very enemies from the judgment of my own countrymen. The enemy protects me from my own people.
She's grappling with the complete breakdown of her reality.
And then the ultimate emotional healing comes in March of 1946. The snow is finally melting.
And Private Chen brings her news.
Monumental news. Acting on his own initiative, using Red Cross channels, he found out that Ko's mother was alive. She was in a village near Tokyo.
Oh my God.
Ko wrote that her knees just went weak. Months of this existential grief were just gone, replaced by this immediate, profound hope.
And she gets to write home.
Chen helps facilitate it through the Red Cross. And the letter she writes, it just shows how completely her mind had shifted. She tells her mother she's being treated with more kindness than I could have imagined. She says, our enemies are not the monsters we were told they were.
Does she address the shame? The idea of being a traitor?
She does, head on. She writes that she is not ashamed anymore. She argues that choosing to live taught her the truth about the world, and that being alive was not a betrayal, but a gift. She was choosing her own definition of honor.
And her mother's reply.
It solidifies everything. It doesn't mention the military or honor or national shame. It just says, you are not a traitor, you are my child, and I love you.
That's the final piece, isn't it? That familial reassurance.
It allowed her to finally accept survival as a form of courage, not cowardice, and to really begin to heal.
So then the repatriation orders arrive, April 1946.
And it brings on this classic mixed emotion. They're joyful about going home, but they're also terrified of the devastation and poverty they know they're going back to.
And there's sadness.
A strange, unexpected sadness at leaving this place, this sanctuary. They were saying goodbye to the enemy that had become the only consistent source of safety and dignity they'd known for half a year.
Captain Thompson gives a final address.
He does, and with Chen translating, he acknowledges this incredibly complex relationship. He tells the women they're leaving not as vanquished enemies, but as people we have had the honor to protect. He recognizes their dignity.
He affirms their human value.
Yes, and then comes the final act of protection, the final acknowledgement. It's maybe the most moving scene in the whole story.
The salute.
As the women board the buses to go to the port, the American guards, Mitchell, O'Brien, Chen, the others, they line the path, and they salute them.
And this wasn't mockery.
No, it was a genuine salute of respect, a final confirmation that the guards saw them as human beings who had endured something immense, not just as numbers on a prisoner roll.
An acknowledgement of a shared humanity across this huge divide.
It was. Ka stopped briefly by Private Chen to thank him, and his last words to her really sum up the entire experience of Camp McCoy.
What did he say?
In a mix of Japanese and English, he told her, "Be safe, and remember that the world is more complicated than anyone tells us. There is good and bad everywhere. Do not let anyone make you ashamed for choosing to live."
That's the whole legacy right there.
It encapsulates everything. This story is a tiny footnote in history, so easily overlooked, but it's this massive statement about human nature. The guards proved that their duty to the powerless had to transcend nationality.
And the women learned that the true enemy is complicated, that sometimes the greatest threat to your dignity comes from the very system you are taught to uphold.
The specific acts of compassion, the sandwich, the hot water, Mitchell's intervention, they literally rewrote the women's understanding of the world.
And the ultimate symbol of it all has to be that warning.
Run, your commanders are coming.
A
A moment of profound moral clarity from soldiers who risked their standing to protect the humanity of women who their own society had already labeled as traitors.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting for us today. Here's a thought for you to mull over as we close out. The American Guards, they risked political consequences to protect the dignity of enemy women. They were actively choosing kindness over cruelty.
Choosing connection over protocol.
So, if the greatest act of resistance, even inside the machinery of war, is simply choosing to be kind, how does that shift our definition of honor? And where do we find true loyalty in our own, complicated lives?
That decision to see a person, not just a uniform, that's a profound ethical choice that echoes far beyond a POW camp in Wisconsin.
Thank you for joining us for this Hidden Front History Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.